She wipes her cheeks of phantom tears. What's on tonight? It's trauma and fear. Gaze into the black mirror with eyes to see. Couldn't be clearer. Oh, oh, we hold these truths, you know. Oh, we've got the proof. Oh, you know the thing. Pour yourself some discernment, my friend. Distractions and traumas. One begins before the other ends. Say no, reject the lies. The truth is imperative. That's why we're reframing the narrative.
All right, welcome everyone to this week's episode of Reframing the Narrative, and we are super excited to have our guest Anton join us. Now, we know Anton from a chat that we're all involved in. We'll call it a secret truther chat, and if you're cool enough, maybe one day you'll get the invite. But without further ado, Anton, it's really cool to have you on here.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Very honored. This group chat really is the best thing ever. I'm 28, so I've been on the internet for a good amount of years, reading about conspiracies for a good number of years. And the internet is nice, but sometimes you might find a group of people that are really nice and that you like and like-minded. So that's a blessing to have. So let's get it rolling.
Yeah, well, you know, I agree with you. And it's a rare thing these days to find a group of like-minded people online. And certainly we've built that community with the chat we're referring to. And Jake and I actually met during the scamdemic in 2020. And that's when people were forced to go IRL and meet people face to face. Of course, Jake and I really hit it off in our initial conversations because we would one up each other with rabbit holes and truth facts, and it eventually became what we're doing now on a weekly basis. But before I get too far ahead of myself, Jake, good to see you as always. And why don't you just jump in there and kind of tee things off for young Anton here?
Young Anton. He's a man. Look at the beard. Well, welcome, Anton. It's great to see your visage through this wonderful medium that we have, this blessing and a curse known as the internet. What's on your mind and what's important to you these days? I know you're exploring New York with your new camera and doing some fun things like that. So maybe you can tie that in as well.
Well, we're given a narrative, the mainstream narrative, and conspiracies refer to really anything that just disagrees with that. So I think a lot of people, just on the street, they certainly have some conspiratorial views, I'm sure, but there are degrees to it. And I think it's pretty important because there's a difference between a conspiracy on the level of, say, moneyed interests buying politicians, and the politicians all being in some kind of demonic club. So I think there's a big difference there.
Since you mentioned that you kind of got into that world and that opened up things, and then that's how you ended up in our group, I thought that might be maybe an interesting avenue to travel down to explore how it got to where you are today in your thinking. So yeah, take it away in whatever direction you want to go. We're not framing your narrative here.
I appreciate that.
Of course.
So a question I ask myself all the time is, looking around at normal people and stuff, like, I'm a fairly normal person. I go to work and stuff, I'm like, how is everyone not into conspiracies? I mean, everyone's exposed to them, right? everyone's heard of them. Just read about it. It's so for me, it started with marijuana. I was in freshman, and I smoked pot. And back in the day, it was way more illegal. Like it's actually legal now, so it was actually illegal in New York. And so, uh, but that begs the question: hey, what's going on? So you know, what I mean, like growing up with the internet, and that's actually what boggles my mind a lot. Is that all of my generation grew up with the internet and had the same capability as I did, and again, all the same people smoking pot. But how did they not just go online and read about stuff? I mean, man, it's tough. But yeah, so with pot, right? What you get from pot is that, oh, okay, so the government will forcibly capture you if you are holding a joint, for example, which in practice, yes, in fact, they did do that. Plenty, selling is a whole nother question, but what a stupid question. It's a plant, man, right? Whatever. So, yeah, so that's pretty much where my conspiracy journey started, was just reading about how pot's illegal, not because the government cares about us, but because, and therein lie different questions like, oh, why is it illegal? Is it moneyed interests, or is it some kind of spiritual attack or whatnot? Um, God knows, but yeah. Mm, mm. No, I'll let you guys rock and roll with that in some direction. I'm sure I'll chime in with something, certainly.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. And we talked about this a little bit last week. It's by virtue of the government taking something away or restricting it, it actually creates more demand for it. And it should make you question, what are they really doing behind the scenes? You look at prohibition in the 1930s, people were going crazy to try to get their hands on alcohol. And I don't think that demand really died down after that. If you look at marijuana, I recall living in California and going on a first and last date with someone who was driving a campaign in California to get it legalized. And that person had told, actually, now that I think back, this was maybe 2012. So, but this person had told me in 2016, watch out, it's coming, legalization is happening. We're putting our foot down. And sure enough, that's when things really started to ease up in California. And I don't actually think that's by accident, because if you look at what happened in 2020, which places, which parts of the country locked down the hardest? Well, if you correlate that to with the places that had legalized marijuana, it kind of makes sense that they wanted people sedated and less likely to act. So I don't think these two things are unrelated. And so one might say that something like marijuana, that generally speaking, people, when they get high on that, they don't really accomplish much. They don't really do a whole lot. They like to mellow out and just stay out of the way, right? I mean, I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but by and large. And you really do have to question, and I see where you're coming from with that perspective, that, hey, why would they make it illegal in the first place, and what's the real motive? And I think that there's been this push, this underground demand that's grown over time, and then eventually they said, okay, fine, guys, we'll let you have it. But why did they let us have it? And I think 2020 showed us, they showed their hand a little bit on that. And Jake, I don't know what your experience was there as well, but I think it's probably, the powers that shouldn't be, or the parasite class, certainly they play a long game. And there's plenty of evidence before 9/11 that they were planning that. There was all the predictive programming. I think with the recent CK event, there's plenty of predictive programming that people have flagged. Nothing just happens on accident. And I can't remember if it was FDR or someone of that generation who had famously said that if something happens in politics, you can bet it was on purpose. But Jake, what are your thoughts there?
Any of these events, including something like prohibition. In a sense, it's a mechanism for reordering society in the way the shapers want it to go. In the case of prohibition, it was like, well, we're really going to take control over the distribution of it. So automatically, I think of the same situation going on with cannabis, marijuana. It's been on my mind in for a long time, but what is it about life and modern life that makes people want to run away so much and tune out and just numb themselves? Why is it? Was it ever something that people maybe they were just too busy trying to make a living, trying to put food on their family, as my pal George W. said? I don't know, but this we're encouraged now, and we're going to be as AI and avatars and augmented reality, things like that are introduced further into our lives, and maybe with travel restrictions that the WEF is talking about, things like that, we might just only have that, and we're encouraged to retreat into a world of just fantasy, unconnected to reality. What is it that makes people just want to anesthetize themselves and not even think? You'll even hear people saying things like, oh man, it hurts to think that much. Just don't make me think. Or they'll say, oh, I just want to tune out. I just want to veg out. And we even have kind of catchphrases like chill out and watch Netflix, right? That kind of stuff. What is it? It makes people want to run away from themselves. I don't know, but it's being encouraged.
I'll take a stab at that, and I think this is just reflections of my own self-development in recent months, but I think that we're all taught to get into a certain cage. There's a certain system we're supposed to follow. We're supposed to get a certain level of government and volunteer indoctrination, which is supposed to lead to a certain type of cage and a certain type of wage. I didn't intend for those to rhyme, but I think I'm going to use that from
Well,
now
that was
on.
good.
Yeah. So, a
We'll
certain
take it.
type of cage for a certain type of wage. You heard it here first. But it's true. And people get into these boxes and then they're taught to fight hard to get the top name or classification within that cage so they can stand a little higher in that cage above everyone else. And they realize when they get to the top of that cage, this ain't what I thought it was. And or fighting to get to the top, they don't quite get to the top and they realize that fight doesn't even seem worth it. So no one's really happy in that cage, and people don't really learn self-ownership. They don't really learn doing something that truly gives value to people, that's fulfilling to them and fulfilling to others. And I think that's part of that. Well, what do I do now except veg out, get high, watch Netflix, put on a VR goggle, just tune the world out and act like it doesn't exist? I think a lot of that is because people really aren't taught self-ownership and doing what matters to them.
How can that be taught though? I've spent countless hours watching YouTube. Um, in a sense, just killing time. Um, I think it's a motivational issue. Mm, but asking people sometimes, like, what's your dream? What would you like to do? People, very rarely do they want to create something, um, which boggles my mind. Aside from that, you see like homeless people and stuff, and so there's definitely a great fear of ending up in that kind of trouble. So people understand that if they just play along and go to school and do the stuff, that they'll be fairly comfortable at least and avoid that.
It's a system that's in many ways set up to fail, and I've seen this in my own experience in another episode from way back when we talked about the beast system only takes, and I talked about a loved one who had passed who had a lot of frustration about the cage that he was used to going away, and he kept trying to find that same cage instead of trying something completely different and being free and reinventing himself. And most people aren't prepared for that. And to be honest, I've gone through that journey, but I'll just give credit to God to bringing me in the right place to start developing myself and realize some of these things, and have that thirst to figure out how I have that self ownership, how I do what I really want to do with my time. And it really takes, just as you, Anton, took the effort to learn about what's behind the curtain, in the same way there's so much wealth of wisdom out there in books, and I've been stacking books, and it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I had learned this 20 years ago. There's so much out there that you can learn and develop yourself, but you're never going to get that in institutions because they're not designed to do that. And I think that, going back to Jake's question, how, what is driving people to have this lost feeling? It's because they're chasing cheap pleasures that never satisfy. I think that at the end of the day, that's really what's driving some of that lost feeling within people. And they're like, well, to heck with it, I'll just tune out. Why even participate? So I don't know if either you guys want to comment there.
I wonder if there's trauma involved, because I think of a wholesome person as understanding that drugs or entertainment are cheap pleasures, and true happiness comes from, in my opinion, being able to look and see, oh wow, I made this, or just like happiness with something that is permanent and not fleeting. And it's possible that there's some kind of trauma element as a whole societally that causes people to um, shy away from, maybe, for example, family building and stuff. That's a true source of happiness, for example. Um, Economic difficulties potentially would maybe make somebody be happy to be a wagey and a cagey, instead of trying some entrepreneurial pursuit. Of course, credit, right? The lending of money being kind of a difficulty, that doesn't help. Uh, you know, I've had so many ideas, and I actually really don't blame any kind of trauma or the government or anything for any of my slowness to act. But it would be fantastic if I could get a loan. Now, of course, I could get a loan. Probably takes like a business plan or proposal or whatnot, something like that.
I think you touched on something with loans and who can get them. That's kind of part of the cage and the trick. If you have gone through medical school and gone through the trauma-based mind control of sleep deprivation and memorization, you can still get a loan because they know that you're just going to be doing what they expect, and you're going to be jamming needles into people's arms and writing prescriptions for pharmaceuticals. And there's an income stream that's going to come, and it's going to be within their paradigm. And I think I mentioned it on a recent episode that we did. And that's, you can notice that a lot of, whether it's like horror movies or just the daily news feed, there's a lot of this trauma, like this, literally they're trying to like split us into little personalities. The way trauma-based mind control works is visiting trauma upon us, and then we dissociate. And so maybe we're so dissociated from ourselves, starting with hospital births. And we'd like to get a couple guests on to talk about that.
Yeah, totally agreed there. And I was going to say it if you didn't. I know that this has been near and dear to your heart, Jake, about circumcision, and Agent just wrote up a good series on that and talked about its origins. And again, we've been sold a bill of goods about why that's necessary, but that's just one example of what happens very early on, obviously for a male, but there's many forms of hospital and big pharma trauma that happened to the youth very early on that traumatizes them and just puts them behind mentally and spiritually in some way that they're always fighting. And to your point too, the people who don't know what it is that they want to do or don't have a vision for the future, I think that was beat out of them by the public indoctrination camps, that every child who's, let's say, 3 to 5 years old, they're so used to asking why, and having crazy wild dreams and coming up with things that are super creative. But by the time they go through the indoctrination camp, they're taught to not ask questions, to memorize, to regurgitate, and to act a certain way. So then by the time they get into adulthood, they say, well, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't as cool as everyone said it would be. What now?
I'll add another thing that I think our entire Western culture, we have in our society this almost this like psychopathic fear of death. And we avoid it. We don't talk about it. We don't embrace it as part of life. And that's something that when in Mexico, when they celebrate the Day of the Dead, it's not a morbid thing. And if you've experienced the death of a loved one, as I have, and come to terms with it, it helps you really become crystal clear on death being just part of the change. It's just another change that comes with life. And so when an entire society fears death, then what do? We worship youth. We reject people that are getting older. Like actresses have to Botox themselves and end up looking like Joan Rivers, the poor thing. And it's not an honest society that is just trying to cover up one of the biggest facts of life, and if not the biggest one.
I'll just add something here. You touched on a really important there about mainstream media and entertainment giving this false sense of what a person should look like. And I'll take that a step further. I can't recall which Substack author wrote a piece about this recently, but I read something really good recently about the gender inversion that happens in many Hollywood circles, and how often men who are pose as women, women pose as men, and that's also by design to create confusion and to create false senses of how people individually could strive to look a certain way when it's not biologically possible. And I think that just adds to the overall confusion and trauma that we've been talking about.
Hollywood's a whole can of beans. I came across the gender inversion stuff like a decade ago, and since then it's been just in the back of my mind. I mean, yeah. So, but the guy that exposed me to it, Mr. E, on BitChute, he had a fairly detailed overview with documents showing their occult texts, talking about how that's like an important thing for them to be the masculine and feminine energies and all that stuff. Um, Aside from that, I think generally every single person grows up with media, meaning like entertainment media, like Hollywood and television and stuff, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it's really fairly centralized as far as I understand, and the message is pretty consistent.
And the reach of that culture production machine is vast. I lived in Asia for just about as long as you've been alive, Anton. And one thing people would say to me sometimes is they would have some kind of an impression of America, and it would be so far off base, or it would only represent maybe just like the white picket fence version of America, or just like this small subset of people that go to Ivy League schools or whatever it was. And since I was in Asia, I would say Well, let me give you an example of how off base that is. You saying that about America is like me going, "Oh my God, you mean you can't run on walls and then jump over roofs?" Because that's what I see in Hong Kong movies. Like you mean you're not good at kung fu and you're not a swordsman, that kind of thing. You can't just leap up and fly over a gorge. That's what you see in Hong Kong movies. So why would you expect Hollywood movies to show you the truth? But I thought we'd maybe get to a topic that we had in mind as a theme today, which is just the power of no.
The word tyrants hate the most, and no is
There you
definitely
go.
it. And certainly, Anton, I know that you've been exercising that word in certain places. So maybe just tee things off. Where have you found kind of your stance and saying no to things in some of these narratives, or pushing back against things that you were supposed to do?
I think that there's a lot of rules in society. That's what comes to mind for me. So in this sense, it would be saying no to following certain rules. So certainly there are certain rules that are actually obvious, like theft and murder and stuff. So mm, I'll give you an example. You can't have a campfire in Brooklyn. Um, Even in some places on your own property, like if you have a house and whatnot, you can't have a campfire. You can barbecue all you want, cook all the meat you want, but you can't just enjoy a nice fire. So, you know, throughout my youth and stuff, people sometimes they have campfires on the beach or somewhere, but it's always illegal. So I think that any person should be able to have a reasonable self assessment and trust their self assessment to determine whether or not a rule should be followed. Um, you look around and it's like do unto others what you would want to be done to you. That kind of thinking where it should be pretty obvious. You know, I'm not harming anybody. Probably don't leave the fire. Probably put it out when you're done with it. But you know, another example. We have crossing the street now in New York. Everybody knows that in New York you kind of just cross whenever you feel like it, um, and so it seems obvious, but a lot of people do just stand there looking at the red light, even though there's no cars. I don't know. Hmm, I don't know.
That ties into the principle of like no victim, no crime, right? It makes sense to us, but for society at large, we're indoctrinated with these ideas that when the light is red, it's red. And the only reason we're not crossing the street is because there could be a camera somewhere, or there could be a cop waiting to jump out at you and cite you for jaywalking. Or in China, I've seen this where they have the face recognition tied in to their citation systems. You can jaywalk, and by the time you reach the other side of the street, your phone is blowing up saying that you've been cited because the facial recognition, and you've just lost the social credit that actually exists. But I think part of it is literally it's the threat of violence, right? That we follow these rules, and what is government but an organized crime family or consortium that has the power of violence. They have the ultimate monopoly on violence.
And I think that really highlights the importance of narratives, because if you think about it, so many people who are in the armed forces have grown up with this sense that being part of the military industrial complex is somehow serving your fellow man. And I think until people see the effects of that, and certainly you have an example of that with a friend of yours who was a pilot and a conscientious objector. He went in with that same set of narratives, let's go get the bad guy after 9/11, right? And then he saw the horrors of what he was actually doing, and he decided he'd exercise his right to say no. And that's an example where no is really powerful, but the narratives got him to that position, to seeing the impact of what he was actually doing, and that's when he had to make the hard choice to say no. And certainly we've all had, even in the last 5 years, I'd venture a guess that there was that point in 2021 where people were really being coerced to roll up their sleeves and to take the injection. And it was hard for many people, myself included, to say no, because they structured society in a certain way that if you didn't go along with it, then things got really hard and keeping a job was tough. The theater went on for a solid almost 2.5 years. And saying no is not always easy, but it is powerful every single time.
Yeah, I luckily, then again, I wouldn't have done it even if I was in some kind of position like in schooling or in a job that required it, because at that point, it's been so many years of conspiracy stuff that I knew that it's not happening, man. It's just not going to happen. You'll have to do it forcibly through the air, food, and water if you want to get to me. Uh, so no, I didn't do that. It's heartbreaking, man. People just working jobs. You gotta get it. All right, insanity, insanity, really.
with real health repercussions that we're seeing all over the place. And I'm sure almost everybody can cite an example of someone that there's, of course, no direct proof, but a lot of times, like someone you knew or someone that knew someone was directly affected and almost immediately. Or, like, for instance, I've probably mentioned it before here. I had a friend who didn't make his 56th birthday, and he was the fittest person. He won half Ironmans. He never won an Iron. Well, he did win an Ironman. I was second place. Yeah, he won an Ironman. And he literally died suddenly at 55, July 24th of 2024. And somebody else I know in my local church community, 25, 26, just newly married and got turbo cancer. Where did that come from? So, I mean, not saying no can have fatal consequences. So, do you think that, like, just saying no is kind of like exercising a muscle? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, probably. It's I don't think this is just my personality. I think it's universal that most people are, to some degree, people pleasers, and to another degree, just want to get along, want to go with the flow in a sense. That, well, they don't want trouble, actually. In fact, like when a guy is robbing you at gunpoint, it's not that you want to go with the flow. You just don't want to get shot. So you don't say no. You say, okay, here's my wallet. So yeah, so saying no is in different circumstances potentially incredibly difficult. And how many examples? I've heard about, probably in the group I've heard people with their kids at the doctors. Oh no, my buddy actually told me with his kid at the doctors saying no to that. That's tough, man. That is tough. I I gotta imagine these doctors actually believe it, but come on, man. Are they not curious to just look into it? I mean, it's the whole thing. People, oh, vaccines, vaccines. Just look into it. I mean, it's clear as day if you do look into it. So, or maybe they're actually demons. Some of these doctors, I'm sure, are actually probably evil. Some of them, I'm sure.
Well, I think a lot of people who get into the profession and become doctors, they really, at the end of the day, are doing it for status and for money. And certainly, I think if you sell your soul in a certain way, even if you're in what should be a noble profession, you certainly can invite dark forces and spirits into you to dictate your behavior. So I don't think that's out of the question, but certainly I've seen it. And I remember when I was still living in Jake's part of the US, and I had gone to a doctor for some sort of regular check-in, and that doctor had asked if I was up to date on the V's. I was like, no, never again. I'm not touching that. It's garbage. The science is junk. He's like, oh, I read the journals every day. It's quite good science. But that's what they're taught, and they've never been given a reason to question. And literally, they have one semester, if that, talking about virology and talking about how vaccines are made or any of that. And so they have very little motivation to question it, especially when they were going through as interns and they were poor, and the pharmaceutical reps were taking them to lunch and giving them little bonuses and becoming their best friends. Why would they go against that once they're in the profession full time? It just doesn't make sense. They've been fully indoctrinated. So I do believe, unfortunately, that many of them think that they're doing a good thing, and they really haven't put two and two together when they see people with all these health problems who've been stuck like a, like a cushion, like, or a pin cushion, and they come back with asthma and allergies and all sorts of issues, right? They never make those connections, and there's no motivation to make those connections, and that's actually part of the reason for the limited hangout of people like RFK to, quote unquote, fight against it when they're actually in the pocket of the pharmaceutical companies, but they have to put up some level of opposition, and then by virtue of what they're doing, make resisting look stupid and crazy. And there's so much more that we could say on the role of controlled opposition like RFK, and what they do to the narratives and how they position people who think critically. But going back to doctors and the medical profession, they believe that they're doing the right thing because that's what they've been taught, and they've never had a motivation to question why or to question what.
In the case of cancer, it's just a given that you're going to do radiation and chemo when the statistics show that the survival rate is at least as high for those that don't do chemo, especially. It's probably higher, but it's just what you do. In my own life, I found that one thing you can do is you can point people to books or awesome podcasts with massive followings like ours, and you can you can point them to information, or you can just talk to them directly, and that might not have it definitely may not have an immediate effect. It may not have an effect at all. But one thing I found is if you just walk a different walk than other people, then they become curious, and they might end up willingly and voluntarily asking you questions like, why don't you use sunscreen is a good one, right? Like, everybody's going out on a boat, we're all going fishing, we're going to get salmon, whatever, we're all in this together. Why don't you use sunscreen? Well, okay, opportunity. And you don't have to give them a lecture. You just go, I've never used it, my skin has been awesome, or something like that. Like, I enjoy sweating, it's good for me, I get the toxins out. But that's just an example. Or why do you follow a certain diet? Or why don't you have a Talmud vision in the middle of your living room? Just being a little bit different, it can attract those questions, and you can lead by example without having to get up on a soapbox and be a leader. I think back to when I was a little kid, and my parents, fortunately, they told me, don't be a follower, be a leader. And I've never had the chance, and I've never really wanted to be a leader of men in the sense that, like, I'm running a team in an advertising agency or something like that. But I have been able to lead by example.
Spiritually, sometimes people say stuff like, not trying to change the world, but to change yourself. And that definitely is a bright example. Another thing, you could read about stuff and you could hear about stuff, but if somebody fairly well tells you something that is fairly valuable. So absolutely, working or within ourselves. Yeah, as an example, as an example. Certainly, another detail is that if I've shared with people, oh, like I'm trying this diet out, um, they wanna see results.
I feel like it would be interesting, Anton, to fill in our listeners with a little bit of your backstory because you grew up in a different part of the world. And I wonder what was the story? I feel like there was a no there that said no to what was happening to make that immigration to the US.
I think one benefit is definitely feeling different, and so maybe not as strong of a feeling of needing to conform. But I only grew up there, and I only finished the first grade in Ukraine, and mm, beside that, it's it's a white country, so it's actually generally pretty much the same. Really, not the same, sure, but the basics are the same. It's again, it's a Christian kind of country. So where I grew up here, I was surrounded also by you know maybe half white people, but overall everybody kind of gets along on the same kind of vibe.
Well, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on. I mean, you mentioned marijuana was the starting point for you to question what was going on with the government, but I, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, they don't want me to have it, but I'm going to get it," and then that's where the story ends. But what was your breakthrough moment of seeing behind the curtain? Because you're a little too young to probably have remembered the events of 9/11, and certainly people of Jake and my generation witnessed it on some level. Actually, was very close to it. I saw it on TV, but we lived through that trauma, and it woke up a number of us on some level to say something ain't right here. What was your something ain't right moment?
So I was 13, and generally, most normies or whatever, just most people that go around, generally, you don't think of the government as evil, and so if um, they are putting people in jail, which is fairly serious. I mean, and again, for what? For smoking a joint, right? So if they're doing something like that, and if it's not misguided, if it's actually intentional to do harm, that was it. It was just the realization that, the government seems to be a little bit evil, and that really opened the floodgates because it's just important, right? If I'm alive here on Earth and the government's evil, I probably should know about it. I should probably know as much as I can about it so I can avoid any um, harms of an evil government. I mean, they're the government; they're pretty powerful, so fairly important. So that's pretty much why I was so drawn to it because I had to know really as much as I could about it. And then once you start on the internet, it just there's rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and things get even more interesting with war, stuff like that. So I was able to leave the Ukraine due to some uh, family stuff. Like we're my family's Christian, so we didn't have any kind of special ability to leave the country. It was due to probably having to do with my aunt, my late aunt, um, marrying somebody who was an American citizen, and then that's what I was told, at least something having to do with that. And then eventually we made our way here. But what's sad is that why would anybody want to leave Ukraine? You wouldn't, because it's incredible. It's just beautiful. Everything's nice. All the people around you are Ukrainian, and it's lovely. It's just beautiful. So same reason, same thing with I'm sure like Ecuador or something. Why would anybody want to leave Ecuador? I'm sure it's nice over there. The issue is that the governments of both countries and all countries have been long ago conquered to the degree that the economy is so screwed that people are forced to try to go to Europe or America and whatnot. Um, so from my understanding, I understand countries have to import items, sure, but as far as I understand, like with the example of Germany, you can just have a healthy society that is self sufficient, where the government um, prints money in accordance with the needs of the people and doesn't distribute the money in nefarious fashions. As far as I understand, you know, whatever country has a higher IQ doesn't really matter because they can still have a a very successful internal system where it's a large healthy middle class. That's my understanding. So that's the tragedy with Ukraine and stuff, and like every other country, is that yeah, a lot of people left because it sucks, corruption, right? Loveliest thing ever is like you come to America, oh no, there's no corruption. No, there's rule of law. Wow, we don't bribe police here. you know which is a fact. I guess we don't do that. It's more high level than that, I suppose. It's all a bit fun.
In the case of America, it's almost like it's more crushing to discover that there really is corruption because we have this mythology tied up in this American dream, the founding myths of America. When you eventually get to the center of that rotten onion and you find a bunch of gangsters, especially gangsters that are loyal to other countries and ideas and principles that completely go against all of the mythology that you were taught, it's really crushing and demoralizing. And I think one thing a lot of people are going through at various stages is demoralization. I don't think it's very healthy to look at something and just say everything's fake and gay. But that's kind of where we are right now because anything coming through that black mirror, that screen, you just can't trust it. So you need a moral compass and you need some kind of guiding force and guiding light. And that can lead to introspection and some kind of spirituality. And I hope that's where people turn when they, instead of just getting completely lost and turning to distractions and destructive behaviors.
You made me think of the appeal to authority, where as opposed to that, and my question is, why don't people trust themselves to be able to look on both sides of an issue and figure out what is actually true? Because fundamentally, that's actually all we have. All we have is we take in all of the input, right? Eyes, ears, all that. And then we have to determine what is true. Of course, it seems a lot of people, maybe not because it's easier, maybe because for some trauma reason, lack of self esteem, that they defer to an authority.
Yeah, so true. So many people outsource their thinking to others because they're the quote unquote expert. And again, it's this lack of self accountability and ownership to examine what's being thrown at them and use their God given senses to determine what really is real. And to Jake's point, I think we have got to that point that if it comes through a screen, our default should be it's probably bullshit. And I was just skimming through a recent Peggy Hull Substack where she was talking about the trademarks of a psyop, and she was saying, basically the same message. If it comes from the mainstream media, the default is to not believe it and then figure out what the real story is. And I do feel like we've gotten to that point in our society that if it's being broadcast to you, and this shirt is on intentionally, if it's being broadcast to you, it's there for a reason. The camera only points where they want you to look, and there's always a narrative being spun at you with anything that comes through the news in whatever format that is. And so it really is up to us to use our discernment, as we've said many times, to figure out what really is real and what's worth internalizing and then acting upon, or is it just noise out there to distract you?
You just reminded me I was thinking earlier, or maybe yesterday or whatnot. I was wondering about chemtrails. Okay, so I I can't fully understand why they would want to poison the air and water and food, unless there's some kind of spiritual component to it. That's the best that I've got, and I'm still at a loss because when it comes to the spiritual component, it's so out there that I obviously have no bearing to make any kind of judgment. But of course, I understand that the government, uh, world government, U.S. government, whatever, that they are completely under the control of some kind of evil that has some kind of spiritual component to it. And I have not yet really figured out why do they need to spray so much all the time? What's the benefit of it?
I think you touched on a really important point earlier in this podcast where you were talking about the Luciferians of the world, the people who have sold themselves to that ideology. And actually, this ties into what Jake was saying about the myths of the starting of our country, and another tip of the hat to Agent, who's digging into that now currently. But I mean, all these people were Freemasons, and you look at Benjamin Franklin and him being part of the Hellfire Club. These are not the good guys that I grew up in grade school reading stories about. These were people very much in a dark mindset, in a dark spiritual place, and that's just perpetuated throughout the history of the U.S. And listeners will have heard me say this before. I'm not even convinced a lot of these characters existed in the way that they've been told to us. But if we take it at face value that these people were the people that we're told they were, certainly they were Freemasons, Illuminati, Jesuits, that whole pyramid of power structure that was just duplicated and brought from Europe over to the States. But all that is to say, yes, why would they spray? Why would they poison the water? Why would they do all these things? Because I think at the end of the day, there are disembodied spirits out there that are really pissed off that humans are living the life that they are and they can't live that life, and they're influencing the people who are at the very top level. There is this idea, I mean, it goes to Bill Gates, it goes to all those people who are quote unquote philanthropists, but in fact are helping to push agendas to depopulate the world. And that's not just, the bare starting point for truthers is, oh, follow the money. Well, follow the money is like first grade level analysis. You have to go much deeper to understand what's really going on, and it really does get to the dark and spiritual world to really understand why would they do this to people. It's not about money. They own the printing press, they own the money. That has no interest to them. So this is really about that, the inversion, right? It's getting people to do what's not in their best interest, or to accept their poisoning or their punishment and to ask for more. This is part of that as above, so below Freemason ethos that just drives everything. And I'll say to our viewers, if you haven't invested the 4 to 5 hours in the classic documentary about Freemasonry, Attilian Childs, it's excellent. He shows you how everyone in every position of power has made that oath in some way. I'll just say, for the long neglected but soon to be resurrected Central Texas rabbit hole, I made a super short version of that video where I took some of the best bits, and I did a video about the Freemasons. Certainly that's just a teaser, but all that is to say, I think you hit the nail on the head, Anton. It really is about things coming from a dark spiritual place. It's not just about trying to control the money supply or to control corporations. They've already got that. So it's much deeper.
Yeah, you made a good point about money, that when you can issue it, that's not what motivates these people or these forces. Money is just a lubricant. Even just like we were talking about, the coercive power of money and the potential earning power to be able to just like, it's just a little snip. And, just from, let's say you're doing like 100 circumcisions a year, that's a lot of freaking money. And you could just buy a bigger boat, or like we saw the incentives with the vaccines rolled out by Dr. Trump there with his Operation Warp Speed. You can find documents that show how incentivized the doctors and medical personnel were to give out those injections, and also the negative coercive power of not doing that raised red flags and then got you audited. For instance, Dr. Tom Cowan, because of digital medical records, the medical board knew that he was getting these diagnoses, but he wasn't prescribing statins in the usual way. And so they said, well, you're going to be on notice and you're eventually going to lose your license. And he said, take your damn license. But and things like 9/11, there's always someone benefiting, someone as visible as Larry Silverstein, pull it, or, just somebody else that benefited. It's a coercive power, but they're not necessarily conspirators. And it's definitely not money, although money does have this kind of mystical, dark spiritual power to it. I mean, there's an all-seeing eye and a pyramid right on our dollar bill, right?
And a hexagram that, if you trace it, spells out Mason. And I'll just say too, I think you brought up some good examples there, Jake, about where money is an obvious motivation for some people on the lower rung. And certainly, at least you and I and those of our generation have watched some of the classic videos from James Corbett and people like that about 9/11, follow the money, things of that nature. But again, the analysis doesn't stop there, and it shouldn't. And I feel like that's why, James does what he does, but he's kind of a starting point. And I feel like if you stop at that level of analysis, you never really understand the big picture. Then you ask these questions like Anton did. Well, why? Is it just that there's a few bad actors out there? No, it goes much deeper.
Follow the money is incredibly shallow, but no, I'm not knocking anybody. I'm not knocking anybody, but it begs interest. It begs further interest. So if you do start looking into things from that direction of follow the money, then inevitably you must find the continuation of that. But the money thing is incredible. People walk around. What do they think happens to the money that we print? Like they're obviously told the story that the money is issued in some kind of official, important, justifiable fashion. I mean, we spend it on government employees. We spend it on, food stamps. You know what I mean? Spend it on. The money goes in a lot of different directions, but they could just really issue money to any cause. There's no reason to expect oversight. So it's incredibly powerful because some people would do anything for money. So you can really have somebody do anything. It's incredible that people don't really question the whole concept of issuing money, the power that's within that.
It certainly does have a tremendous coercive power, and it sucks up a lot of people's attention, as we like to say on this podcast. They become fixated on it and they feel a lack of security if they don't have it. But then they also feel a lot of lack of satisfaction when they do have it. Then other elements become part of the picture, like, well, yeah, it doesn't give me happiness, but I'd rather have it myself than you have it. There's becomes a competitive thing. I went paddleboarding by a house that was on sale on Lake Tahoe recently, and it was for sale for $40 million. And it was a glorious morning. And I felt rich being there. I was in their front yard on the lake, and they even had funiculars, and those people aren't even enjoying the lake, but I was able to just paddle my way right by there, and I felt really rich. So, wealth and self-identity are a very subjective thing.
And I think that many people, I would say most people, are raised with a scarcity mindset. And that's to your point of people saying, I'd rather have it than you, where when you realize that the world is full of opportunity and abundance, you should actually be rooting for other people to succeed, because there's no lack of opportunity, there's no lack of abundance. And this goes back to that idea of self-ownership. The only thing stopping you is you. And if you want more, go create more, go add value to other people. Money will follow. But if you have a scarcity mindset, only I can have it and you can't, no one wins and no one's happy.
There's there's a certain joy. Well, first of all, aside from just the joy of making others happy, there's a joy to creating something that people appreciate, that they would even want to give you money for in exchange for. Um, I understand. Well, no, not I understand, but I can kind of imagine somebody that, for example, gets into, say, finance or something. Why? But back on the money thing, it's unfortunately you actually do need it. Uh, Not in any kind of direct sense, but it's like there's not really that many deer in the forest for you to really feed yourself for your entire life and have a family and what. Really, you're not even allowed to live in the forest, which is messed up, It's a forest, like, whatever. But so you really need money at that point. Can't live in the forest. You really have to pay. Oh, and then of course you don't pay your property tax. They'll take your house. Fantastic stuff. Really brilliant what they've come up with. But um, again, so going into finance, mm, just I'm just a little puzzled by jobs that don't like create. Maybe have that job to support you, sure, but then on your own time, maybe do something fun, create something. I mean, it's just so cool to create. I haven't done enough creating, but I've done a lot of planning things out in like a notebook, different kind of like, working construction as an electrician, you come up with like, oh, this could be done a little easier. This product could be nicer. Just fun stuff like that. I don't know. I think that's the coolest thing ever. And it's just a joy to create something.
And I think this might be a good wrapping up point. Just tell our listeners what's in store for Anton. What do you see yourself creating? What do you want to bring to the world? You can speak it into existence even if it's not there today.
So that's it's gonna take a while to wrap up. No, I'm kidding.
We're good with that.
Briefly, really, since I was a teenager, I was, hearing about war and stuff. Growing up, say in Brooklyn, for example, you hear about war and stuff, and you gotta think, what's going on? Why really war? So, anyways, one thing that I want to create, not really an item, but I figured that it would be possible to start a group with the outward public message and appearance, and in fact truth, of attempting to be a non-governmental, worldwide kind of unification of people. So like the UN, but more like, instead of nations, just people. So just a group of concerned people of the world. That's one thing, but that's not really it. Create what? So I have one of the more important things that I have to really get working on is I want to make a small device that the purpose of this device would be to serve as operational security for communications. So currently, if you want to have secure communications, like me on this computer or on my phone or anything, I could install PGP or GPG software, just encryption software. And then, of course, you get a public key, private key, whatever. The only issue is that this laptop, this phone are internet connected devices, and the hardware and software cannot be trusted. So the idea for this little device would be simply to you would connect that device to your insecure device. From the insecure device, you would send the message, and this small device would not have internet connectivity, and it would actually do the decrypting and encrypting. So, in fact, what would happen is that you're sent a message from somebody, and the actual decrypted text of that message is only visible on this device, which is invisible to the all seeing eye. Similarly, when you want to write a message, that plain text is only visible on the device. The only caveat is that that's me trusting that they don't have the ability to crack PGP encryption. The only thing that somewhat might comfort somebody on that note is that the deep web, we've been using PGP to sell drugs on the internet. Mike is buy drugs on the internet for like a long time. So that's not like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they don't really care about busting every, person that's doing that, but it's possible that it is actually a mathematically secure technology that they may potentially not yet. It's possible that they can't really crack encryption. Who knows? But that's one thing I want to build. Aside from that, I have some dream video game projects I got to work on. Little bits and bobs here. I got a whole list of it. So no, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But the joy of trying to engineer a solution to a problem is fun. It's just fun. And I always like doodling, but I can't really draw. But just trying to figure out a solution mechanically or otherwise to an issue is a lot of fun. So
I like where your head's at. I like where your head's at, man. Just keep solving problems. And when you have that first product ready, come back to the show. Let's talk about it. This will be your first soft launch, and then millions are on their way to you. I'm certain of it.
Absolutely. Goyland Fun Bucks. I can't wait. I'm so happy to have been invited. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Oh, this was awesome. Jake, do you have any parting words? I feel like Anton probably gave us the best zinger there at the close, but Jake, why don't you take us away?
I just need to pursue more of those Goyland Fun Bucks.
Somehow we have to tie that into a different wage and a different cage. I'll play with that.
Absolutely. No, I just wanted to thank Anton for joining us on this ride and providing his unique input, and for being on that private exclusive chat group that we're members of, that you can't join unless you get the secret code. And what's our handshake? We enjoyed it, and hope you'll be back another time pretty soon.
Hear, hear.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to have been here. Thank you guys for having me.
You betcha.
Absolutely. All right, to everyone else, thanks for tuning in, and I'm sure we'll have some other equally fun and entertaining guests in the future. Email us, reframingthenarrative@protonmail.com. Let us know that you want to be part of the conversation. Any and all are welcome. Thanks again, Anton.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.